Hello, everyone. My name is Pierre from the Lean Hire podcast, and today I have a special guest over here. It's Chris from FirstBase. Hey, Chris.
Hi, Pierre. How are you?
I'm very good. I was told that you're in Scotland right now. Is that correct?
I have been stuck in the north of Scotland for 14 or 15 weeks now. Yeah.
Oh, shoot. How come? Was that travel? Was that due to travel restrictions or how?
Yeah, as fate would have it, I flew back to the UK the day before this all blew up in New York. So yeah, flew
Oof.
back. Meetings got cancelled in the UK. Trump closed the borders, and
Ah,
yeah, I think
shoot.
all things considered, probably better to be stuck in Scotland than New York during a global pandemic.
Yeah, and sorry if I have that observation, but you're from Scotland, is that correct, based on the accent, or are you from UK, or which region are you from?
Yeah, I am from Scotland.
You're right, right. And your company is in New York, is that correct? Or headquartered
We're
or
operational about
remote,
across
obviously.
both. Yeah, we very much eat our own dog food, but yeah, we are an American company, but we are supplying companies across the US and the UK right now. Hope to be across the whole of North America and the whole of Europe pretty soon.
Right. And so the reason why I reached out to you, and I think it's great to have your voice on here, is that you're like one of the very loud voices to be pro remote, and obviously your company has some shared interest in that. But when I went through your tweet, I would say the most popular tweet storm, it's about the future predictions, basically what will change and how we will emerge from this pandemic. And there's so many things that I really, really would co-sign. And it's just amazing to have you here now, because this podcast is obviously about the future of work and how we will hire in the future, and what needs people in a remote world have. So I share a lot of, not only interest, but also just so much of your ideas I share. And it's really, really cool to have you here now. So, but to start much, much earlier, like, what are you doing and what's your company doing, and um, where did this passion for remote work came from?
Yeah, I'll start with first base, and I'll try and splice in a little bit of the backstory as to why we arrived at it. So the way I really like to describe first base is as a physical operating system for remote work.
Right,
And what that really means is we help companies supply, finance, and manage all the physical equipment remote workers need to be as safe, comfortable, and productive at home
right,
as they would be in an office. And I think that was actually something that we created in our last startup. We decided we were going to be remote. We experienced some of the challenges and obstacles with operating that way. And something we were super passionate about was providing a great culture and experience to our teams. And as we got our first employee set up, we realized how expensive that was, how time consuming that was. The stuff never turned up. We lost 5 or 6 days productivity. And we basically said, look, let's just solve this problem now for ourselves so we don't have to keep doing this every time we hire someone else. And that was what we did. So we'd experienced the problem. And as it turned out, actually, we were the perfect people to solve that as well. So my background prior to that was putting exactly the same equipment on oil rigs in the most remote places
oh,
on the planet.
interesting.
And my CTO's background was doing, cybersecurity and technical infrastructure in very remote places around the world. So we experienced the problem. We had the skill set to solve it. We built FirstBase as an internal tool in that business. Unfortunately, we never realized how big a problem that was for other teams. So we got back to building that original product. Fast forward 12 or 18, 12 months or so, we finally come to realization we were never going to make any money. Spoke to a few friends. They told us they had the same problem. Spoke to some big banks. They told us they had the same problem. And yeah, pivoted full time, end of August, early September, 0 companies in the wait list. Then looks like we're going to cross 4,500 companies in our wait list this weekend, which is insane.
That's just amazing. And I totally get this pain. We had a company in office, and now we're also running remotely. We've
Yeah.
always been pro remote, even when we had an office. Like we treat it as like this sort of central space to go there. But even when getting stuff to the company, when it was not remotely, it was a pain. I much rather would have like um, give an employee the option to like sort of pick and like like sort of like modularly pick what they want to have, and then
Yeah.
everything would be done through a specific company that does like all the liabilities and refunds, etc. And yeah, you're right, it's such a big pain. And when you like you first really experience that when you grow beyond like a certain amount of people, I'd say the first 5, that's still okay if it spends like 5 hours per person to set up. But
Yeah.
looking at companies that are scaling remotely globally at an incredible pace, like one of my friends is the CEO and co-founder of Deal, and they've been growing so quickly. And I wish I'm not sure how they set up their well, sort of the workspace for the employees, but they must use something like this in order to, well, grow at this rate. And yeah, it's a great problem that you all have identified, given that you're in that space. So it's just very obvious to work on that. That's amazing.
Yeah, there's I think there's a lot of cool people doing a lot of cool stuff. Alex being one of them, Job at Remote, Andre at Graphy, who else I'm missing? Christelle at Cody. So yeah, I think it's just one of those things where there's been such a acceleration of a trend, and we're just the
Yeah,
beneficiaries of it. I think COVID's
yeah,
accelerated. This was already happening, right? Remote work was rising incredibly quickly
right,
if you were looking in the right places. But
right.
in terms of the acceleration that's happened after COVID, you're probably saying, actually, this has accelerated what was going to happen 10, 15 years in the space of 2 or 3 months.
Yeah. No, I fully agree. And I think the main reason why, if you pitch it to companies or pitch it to investors, is this is not a temporary like trend. This is not like companies. Sure, there will be companies who pause in office work, but every company that's being built today or yesterday or in March will basically be remote first by, well, by force. So these companies, they eat this new culture of work. And when you look around all these different companies that are pausing until 2021, they record like record breaking profits, and everyone's getting like this mindset of, hey, we might actually don't need like this physical wall to be gather everyone around. And I think that's just, well, it's an amazing uh, unbundling of just office space. So with all the downsides. So my question is, I'd say, what's your biggest, well, pet peeve with like just offices, or just the work in general being in an office? Like, what's the biggest problem you see that are being solved by remote work?
Yeah, I think there's just several fundamental myths around the office comparative to remote work. So I think the first criticism we often hear is that, what about people who socialize in the office? And yeah, for me, your boss selecting the people you spend most time with is a very bad situation. Like, there's deep societal issues around meaning, isolation, and loneliness, and I think people argue that point and try to say, well, actually, you should meet people in the office. You should spend time with people in the office. And I think my belief is that you should spend time with the people that you enjoy spending time with most. You should be the one that chooses the people you spend time with. And I think the opportunity remote gives you is to stop you wasting as much time in an office, let you do the things that you care about most with the people you care about most, and really focus on developing deeper hobbies. The other criticism I think we hear frequently about the office, or remote comparative to the office, is, what about the times that we solve problems around the water cooler? What about when we solve them in informal breakout spaces at lunchtime or in the corridors between meetings? And I think this is an odd thing to me as well, where people are justifying solving problems accidentally as a positive rather than an indication that a process is broken. So I
Yeah,
think for me, like, the whole thing around remote is this enables people to transition from sacrificing their life for work to begin organizing work around their lives.
yeah,
For me, that's a thing that delivers a massive quality of life benefit, whether it's not having to um, live in a high cost of living city, not have to have a lower quality of life and lower disposable income, being able to focus on your health and well-being. And look, I'm not saying that this is the silver bullet. I think there are challenges involved with remote working, But I think many of the questions that people have around quality of collaboration have been answered because people have been forced to do it. I think
Yeah.
in-person meetings are typically marginally better than video meetings, but are they 20% better? Or are they 20% worse? Are they 10% worse? Are they 5% worse? And then you start to factor in the intangible benefits of not having to waste 2 hours a day traveling to these places to work in a fixed
Right. That's
location.
what people always forget, right? The cost of organizing this.
Right, like it's incredibly easy to not waste any time beforehand or after jumping on a call. Whereas if you're going to meet someone in person, you've got an hour to get there and an hour to get back for a 30-minute meeting, which is so irrational it's almost beyond belief at this point.
I totally agree. When I was in the Bay Area, and everyone knows that the Bay Area is super busy on some days, and it's barely possible to go from like one, let's say, meeting in Palo Alto to San Francisco to some other place.
For
And
sure.
when this could have been just me now calling like 4 people, 5 people within an hour, like that's just incredible inefficient when the whole industry is all about efficiency and cutting out middlemen and, like making the most, also not only economical but also ecological decision, right? um, I I fully agree. There's activities that just are more fun in person. Obviously, no, everyone can agree on that. But we never really factor into the cost and the
100%.
downsides. We always see the positive things of in-person meeting and having 5 people in the same room on a whiteboard. Like that's cool. But if you compare that to having, let's say, 5 people in a same Figma file and everyone's sort of creating and outbursting, and maybe it's not even synced, maybe it's async, and everyone's like pinging in some ideas. We've really seen companies not only build the tools for this, but also succeed using them. So will it be replicatable? I doubt it, but
Hmm.
it's a matter of like costs and benefits, and I think the whole equation is a still it's very early to say that, but I believe it's a net positive to be remote. Just looking at all the different factors that you mentioned in that tweet storm, which I will attach in the show notes later. But yeah, I'm down to have this happening, and we can still all agree that some travel is necessary. But
Yeah.
man, have I spent much time in Ubers and trains, and when it could have just been not even a Zoom call, just an async voice message or a long written letter or a Loom call, which I love doing nowadays.
Yeah.
Like just have like a very simple Loom video of like scrolling down my designs or my engineering part where I have a question and mark it and send it over. Like that's just great. It just feels so much more efficient and so much more aligned with the other person's time, right? Like having this async component, which you don't have in the office.
For sure.
It's always sync. Like you can't escape from that synchronous work. And now you can do both. You can agree on a Zoom call or you can send a Loom video. So that's just also my experience.
Yeah, I can completely agree. I think it's something that you don't really consider until you start to think about the intangible benefits involved with remote. And yeah, it's not an apples for apples comparison. And I think this is why remote work has risen so rapidly. It's just something that it's not iteratively better than office work. It's not twice as good. It's not three times as good. It's literally 10x better because you don't have all those things. And then when you start to factor in the fact that you can have the isolation to do deep focused work without the distractions and disruptions that come while working in an office, which I think in many respects has actually become the worst place on the planet to do deep focused work, which is incredible. Like
Kind of weird,
you look,
yeah.
yeah, you look at the evolution of the office from, I think, a post-industrial revolution world where it was invented as a place to be the best place to do work. It was a place where the technology was to do that work. And then we progressed to a place where everyone was in. So we started in a place where everyone had a private office, and then we had, because of the cost of real estate, everyone has cubicles. And then as real estate gets even more expensive, everyone ends up working in these open plan distraction factory adult kids clubs where
Right.
instantaneous gratification of availability is a thing that people use as an excuse to um, permit collaboration, but what they're really talking about is the ability to pad out a day with distraction and disruption and making it super difficult for people to get work done.
Right. Yeah. And it's if I think about the cost of these spontaneous chit chats when the other person doesn't want to interact, like it's very rare that you have the same sort of break times. Like you
Yeah.
could schedule that, but let's say I'm an engineer and I'm working on this deep focus project, and like my friend who I really like working with comes in the office, and I really don't want to be rude, so I turn to him and just have a casual 10, 15, 20 minutes conversation and then go back to
Yeah.
engineering. That can cost the company like like that happens on a daily basis, because then
Yeah.
I'm done with my deep focus work. I go to my friend and then or my colleague, and then I interrupt them. And where it would just be much more better if people have not this 8 hour per day daily mix of interactions and distractions and work, but just let's, like, you don't need to work 8 hours a day if you have 2 or 3, 4 hours of deep focus and productive work. And then listen, close down your MacBook, meet your family, meet your friends, go to, I mean, now it's not really go to a cinema time, but go, yeah, do some stuff, play some Call of Duty if you want to, and enjoy life, read a book. And I think when we talk about all the pros of cutting down middlemen and making stuff more efficient, we gain time. So what are we going to do with that time? Very ambitious entrepreneurs can now run 2 companies simultaneously from their bedroom because they don't need to drive around in the offices. And you could have 15 more hires, like hire them much faster. So the argument that productivity could go down because of so many distractions, it's more about the person. It's not about the environment. Like, ambitious people will still be ambitious, and people who want to relax more will still do the, well, I quote unquote necessary work, but then they would go back to playing with their children, reading a book, like that's amazing. I think that's what the work should be like, and not be forced in this central space to live essentially in the office.
Yeah, I think, to go back to the previous point around the sort of continuation of the Industrial Revolution, that's exactly what we've done. We've evolved to a point where technology enables people to work whenever they want to work, from wherever they need to work. And right now we're forcing them to go to a fixed location to use technology literally designed to be used anywhere on the planet.
Yeah.
while working, and even worse than that, while working on top of software that enables them to communicate in real time or asynchronously with people all over the world. Like, typically
Yeah.
they're going to office to work with their teammates that aren't in the same office. It's
Yeah.
so irrational, it's actually
Crazy.
painful.
It's
And I
actually
think,
crazy.
to your point, to continue on that thread, where forcing people to work 9 to 5 or 8 to 4, whatever it is ridiculous. Like, why force people to try and be productive at points that they're just never going to be? Like, certain people work better at different times. If you work better at 4 o'clock in the morning, work at 4 o'clock in the morning. Like,
Right.
why would I expect my team to work at 8 to
The
5
office
where I
wouldn't be
know?
even open yet, right? The office wouldn't be open yet.
Exactly. And the reality is, like, everyone has the same thing, right? They go in the morning, they get their coffee, they're productive for a few hours, and then there's probably a period in the afternoon where they have a lull, they have a lack of energy. Well, why not just let them go and do whatever they want to do for those few hours? If they want to go for a run, they want to go and have dinner with friends, they want to spend time with their children, let them, or play games like you mentioned, let them do that. And if they want to come back and work from 8 till 10 at night instead of from 3 till 5 in the afternoon, why does that matter to most companies? I think the reality is we've just got used to working synchronously, when the reality is asynchronous working is going to be the thing that unlocks a massive amount of productivity, because people are just going to work when it suits them best.
Yeah. Productivity, happiness, overall, just confidence in your job. It really empowers people from an employer point of view to tell your employees, I trust you. Like, this is all it's all about trust. It's I think you can make the argument for office as long as you want, like having a community, having a place to go and relax. But if we're really honest with ourselves, it's about like surveillance. It's not about
Yeah,
it's about knowing they are there, having that in people. Most people are like, well, at least I had that experience when I was working in other companies, that uh, I had a feeling to be there to prove I'm working, right?
sure.
Whether that's the idea of the manager or not, whether the manager could be the best or the worst, but as an employee, I had this feeling of I need to be there in order to show I'm working. Whether I was browsing Twitter or writing the most productive code, like that rarely was the argument. So when we all know that there was a statistic about how much time is spent not working in the office, um, that's not the fix for it, right? We will not fix this lack of productivity when we force people in the office. It's more like the opposite. So that's
For sure.
just another mind-blowing thing that people are telling all the time. Like, I need the people to have in the office to sort of know that they're working, and if they have problems, that I can interact with them. But uh, that's just weird. It's really wild to think about that. So it's yeah, I think the Basecamp guys had it really early with the remote book and the whole culture about Basecamp. But it's
100%.
great. It's great to see that this is not a niche anymore, and that there's actually so much to, well, innovate in that space. I think it's the biggest change ever, not only in technology but in life, because it reaches so many people.
Yeah, and I think like we ourselves, and I remember the first time I read Remote, obviously Jason Fried's book, and yeah, just even at that point, 10 years after I think it was published, you're still like, this is incredible. Like
Yeah.
he's pointing out problems that still haven't been addressed today, and I think every time I've read that, I can reflect and I sort of come away thinking, Jesus, like I could build 10 businesses just from the
Right.
insights that he was able to give us. And I think that probably speaks to a larger problem that we're seeing right now around remote tools, where people are just going to end up building things because it's a hot space, that aren't necessarily the right things. And I think there's multiple instances of that where people have built things that in many ways replicate the bad parts of office working,
Yeah.
rather than um, really enabling workers to get the full benefit of working remotely, which is sad, I think.
Yeah, I fully agree. Most people say that they use Slack for remote work, or Slack is one of their core products. And Slack was never really built for remote. It's built by a centralized team in San Francisco that
Yeah,
was for small companies, like less than 20 people, I'd say,
yeah,
that are in the same time zone. Like, it
yeah,
was never meant to be a fully remote first product. And that's one of the, well, I'd say, big uh, problems, that people think, okay, now we can just copy paste our, like, Slack is working in the office. Slack is working great. Slack is working great if you're in the same time zone. But now we see that these companies, as you said, copy paste what's been working and try to replicate that,
for
and
sure.
it just doesn't work. It just doesn't work
Yep.
that way. You need, probably, if you have different time zones, more async protocols and more async procedures. So it really takes remote first teams, as you said, like eat your own dog food in the pre-notes, to understand the issues, the problems, to then build the product, and not have a current product and design it, reskin it to say, yeah, it's working now. I mean, for Slack, it's working, but it's not really, to be fair, the best tool to work on remotely.
Yeah, yeah, I think they probably get a bad rap from that perspective. They never designed it, as you say, the tool
Yeah,
for
it's never
what
meant
it
to
was
be
used
remote,
for.
like not even in marketing, right? So yeah.
Right. But I think the problem is that there's tools now that are emerging who are trying to create remote tools, but they've never operated remotely. And I think
Mm,
I sent a tweet a while ago, which was like, I would never eat in a restaurant where the chef doesn't eat his own food. And I think
exactly.
that's how I feel about these companies who are really just jumping onto a trend without fully, uh, I guess, without really having full cognition of what's needed to work remotely. So, yeah, I think if there was one criticism I've got generally of certain things is that.
Yeah, and that goes for all technology changes, for all trends, for
For
all
sure.
like stuff that's hot. There's always going to be people, third party people who just jump on a train. Some of them succeed, and it's fine. Like that's just the way the world works. But most of them just bluntly fail because the market just doesn't work that way. Um, Most of the
Yep.
time, so either you have a really really deep understanding of the space, or you have zero, and then you just well, you go against the experts, quote unquote experts, and come up with your own ways of how you think this should work, and then find more people of yourself, right? So
For
when
sure.
there's people jumping on a technology for the sake of raising money or for the sake of building a billion-dollar company because others have done it as well, that's usually a really bad incentive to build a company.
100%.
And it's going to be very frustrating down the road for the next 2 or 3, 4, 6 months for sure.
Yeah, I think like, look, I can speak to sort of the reason why we built what we did. I think the best way to build businesses is typically where you're experiencing a problem and you're solving that problem for yourselves. And yeah, I think I've spoke to Alex a deal about this before, where that's just an obvious thing that you do when you're living through the challenge. So yeah, I think even more so than I think most other industries, remote work is going to be a situation where that is always going to be the preferential route, because really you're going to uncover truths that other people just fundamentally haven't seen yet.
Yeah, no, I agree. And collectively, I think it's amazing that so many companies are working collaboratively to work on this. So, for example, we work with Lean Hire. We also work with Deal because it's just a very good platform to have these contract work. And
Yeah,
5, 10 years ago, it was really hard to hire someone as a US company from Germany. And now
yeah,
it's literally a shareable link and a sign with a button. So it's just it's really cool to see that so much complexity previously is just abstracted into simple products, and these products now interact with each other. Like Lean Hire, for example, we try to match remote talent with other companies, but we don't
hmm
do any contract work. We don't do any payments because it's just not our space. We have zero experience in that. So now we can use this different technology, and everything sort of builds on top, and you have this, I'd quote unquote say, remote stack now, which is a definition that just popped up recently, because there was no stack without any products, and now there's products, and they all interoperate with each other. So that's just amazing, how fast this can actually grow, and with every new product, there's something you can build on top or adjust into it. That's something that people don't really get when they look at the space. They see products pop up, but they don't get how important these things were collaboratively. Um,
sure.
yeah, and your company fills in that void. Like you could essentially have, I mean, I'm just brainstorming here, but have someone sign up on Deal and just add, like, send him the company suite, and it would send them a MacBook, a monitor, and the keyboard, etc., from a click of a button, and that would be just factored into the bill. So yeah, it's really cool to see all these products interact with each other at some point.
Yeah, and I think like fundamentally what we're talking about, which is obviously related to the period or time in which we are with respect to the rise of remote, is we're still at the formational stages. We're still creating the infrastructure that enables people to do all these difficult things. And I think the ability for companies like yours to take all those different parts, to leverage them to do things that were previously impossible, at least in my eyes, and this is a hope more than partially an expectation as well, is that we're going to go through the biggest workplace revolution in history because of it. We'll see the rise of the most diverse teams in history because of it. We'll see
Yeah.
workers collaborating who never could have done any of this before. So for me, it's incredibly exciting to obviously be sitting at the front of that and sort of being in the privileged position that we are to see it happening in real time.
Yeah, for sure. It's like we need a new form of incorporating at some point. Like, are you actually an American company if you're like literally spread out across the global, like across the world? Like, am I running a German company if I'm the only German in the team? And I think it gives a whole new feeling to also build something. It's a
Yeah.
global cause. It's something by choice you need to reach every single country in the world. There might some legal restrictions, but no one's forcing you. Well, no one's sort of preventing you to sell to any of these countries. And it's an argument I had with another person on the podcast is you need these people locally to understand their cultures, to know how
Yeah.
to sell in these markets, to do copywriting, to do translations. And it's there's so many aspects like level 3, level 2, level 3 things we now like scratch off that has, well, nothing primarily to do with the being in office, but just being the perks of being global. And that's just amazing to see that there's not only costs being saved, but value being generated by being spread out and having different time zones.
Yeah.
So that's also something that a lot of entrepreneurs don't understand yet, that it's so hard to go from one market, from one country to the other when you have everyone in the same country, and then you want to launch something. Like, you will always treat it as some sort of satellite. It will always be second priorities because you have your main priority, like main market. But now you
Yeah.
have zero market. You have literally no starting market. You don't sell to your global, like your local city. You sell globally. So
Yeah.
act globally, grow globally, and that's just amazing.
Yeah, and I think like the difference is that these companies are starting out with that output in mind at formation, rather than trying to backfill that as they grow. So yeah, just being able to have a global outlook is obviously incredible in terms of the types of companies with their ambitions that we're seeing emerge.
Yeah. I mean, this should not be like the most glorious remote first podcast. There's definitely issues. I'd say, what's the biggest challenge right now that teams, but also new entrepreneurs should be looking out to solve for remote work? Like, what do you say is like one of your personal biggest problems in this space right now?
Yeah, like I think unquestionably the biggest challenge or the biggest obstacle is people trying to replicate the bad parts of office working remotely. So the synchronous communication that we all know is unnecessary is something that companies are just, for whatever reason, keen to perpetuate. And I think in many ways that just destroys the majority of the benefits of being able to work remotely. The isolation to do deep focused work is a feature, it's not a bug. And yeah, I think in many ways, like, just there's not enough good asynchronous tools. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't great asynchronous tools. We've touched on some of them already, like with Loom and others. But I think what you'll find these platforms is they're great horizontal products, which is awesome at the start. But I think what would be helpful for us would be products that are asynchronous, but they're vertically focused. So they have a purpose, whether that's specific types of meetings that we can put constraints on with respect to time or tracking or measurability or anything else. So yeah, I think that's a thing that just hasn't emerged yet because it's not been obvious, but I expect will probably come fairly quickly.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. And it's something we always see when new products launch, that you want to pick a very well-defined niche. And it's just a matter of time until these companies grow out of their niche, and suddenly you have this $1 billion, 10 billion, 15, $20 billion company just serving remote teams. And I'm really down for that. And I can't wait what's happening when this first company who was literally working on a tiny bit of problem in the remote space and grows beyond that and becomes literally the operating system for remote work, or the go-to product and product company. So
Yeah.
yeah, I fully agree that we need to see which problems we want to solve and not like mimic I'd say pre-COVID world. Like I'm every day I'm accepting that there will be a new normal, and we need to figure out how this new normal will look like, and not how can we get more of the old normal back.
Yeah.
There's so much legacy, quote unquote, legacy code that we just literally need to throw away and not try to refactor it. So that's a very good analogy to think about how we can approach new products.
Yeah, and I think like that whole thing, like the new normal, I think is the phrase that's became in vogue, and I think there's sometimes a danger in looking at it as just a continuation, when actually what it is a fundamental reinvention of what we've grown to expect work and working while living looks like. So yeah, I guess if I've got one hope is that people sort of look at this as an opportunity to leave the past behind, not just try and continue that in the same manner, and yeah, try and create something that's better, that delivers a higher quality of life, that
Right.
yeah, gives people the opportunity to live, as I say, a better life. I think that's got to be the hope.
Yeah, no, I agree. Speaking of old legacy stuff, what is your take on the classic way of hiring, like screening interviews and having multiple interviews, and some do even like these cultural interviews, and which is also coming from, I'd say, quote unquote, the industrial revolution. But having people in the office and these back-to-back meetings with HR. What's your take on that, and how can we build a better hiring culture in the remote world?
Yeah, I guess it's a hard question, right? I think we're living through a fundamental change, and I think there's some interesting trends that we're seeing emerging. So rather than necessarily having to hire someone outright on day zero, I think we're starting to see more freelancing opportunities where they can convert to full-time hires in the event that suits both parties. I think interviewing is different. I think interviewing is broken in many respects in office-based companies because they're typically really good at selecting people that are like the panel that are hiring. They're typically really bad at ensuring diversity of thought, diversity of opinions, and diversity of
Background,
everything else.
yeah, of cultural background, right?
Exactly. So yeah, I think I've got no firm beliefs or opinions on this. I think it's something we're still figuring out ourselves. And yeah, I think it's something that I think more my hope is that we use this as an opportunity to diversify hiring. We stop trying to make excuses about people not being a good fit when actually the reality is that your culture is homogenous and you're not a good fit, rather than the other way around.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. Oh, I think you're muted. Did you say something?
no, yeah,
Oh,
I
okay, perfect. Yeah, yeah,
just
okay. Finish the sentence. Okay, yeah, I fully agree. I think when we were running in the company, our previous company in the office, we had the same experience. It had to be local. They had to live in the city, obviously, because they need to come here. Since they are in the city, they have the same background as I, maybe even study at the same university. They don't bring new, experience and insights to the table. And when someone just didn't, sort of quote unquote fit this, they would not be hired. And I think that's horrible, because you lack so much new insights from different cultures and languages and just ways on making business and writing code that you would not get from your local community.
yeah,
And yeah, that's sad. I think it's the biggest challenge we have in hiring in a pre-COVID world, and that should literally not be replicated in post-COVID. Like, we should not be a remote company, but remote means everyone is in the same city and hired from the same sort of pool of talent that we know. That would be a good example of how not to do hiring in the future. So yeah, I totally agree on that. I heard you say that there's definitely a growing market of freelancers, and then also freelancers who turn or become full-time equivalents, like FTEs, full-time positions.
yeah,
And that's something where lean hire comes in. Obviously, I want to talk about that as well in a tiny bit, but we believe that we should drastically shorten the amount of time from someone to get to know them and work with them. And the problem
sure,
we had in the past is that you have these interview cycles that can sometimes take up months and months until that
yeah,
person literally writes productive code. And that is money spent like down the drain. It's just gone. There's so much that can go wrong in that time. And we even in hiring, we call it closing. we say, when did you close that new hire? Which just sounds so weird if you think about it, because someone you hire is not a fixed done thing. It's a living thing that's changing, and
Yeah,
sometimes it takes time to figure out that, whether it's skill set or cultural fit or um,
sure.
everyday interaction. But it's not like, okay, now I'm doing everything in these like tiny steps, and on 1st of July we close the client and now he's here forever. Like, that is also such a weird statement to say, now you're hired. Like,
Yeah,
okay, now I'm full time, now I can relax, or what? So what we try to do is we try to get people on like productive on day one, get them in the team quite early as contractors, as freelancers, which has so much more, well, it's so much easier to get someone on a contract basis. You just literally send an invoice and have the contract law written to you over Deal or other platforms, and run these experiments. And if anyone of you is well, has read the lean startup, we have these lean principles with like iterate, learn, and then this whole cycle. And we
yeah,
try to apply that on the person. We don't want to look at the product
interesting.
itself. So when you think about an MVP, building an MVP, what is the minimum viable hire that we can get in very early, and then run these tests and see how this person fits in the team. And after a specific amount of tests, which these companies and employees or potential employees come up with in the beginning, then you can say, okay, now we have a bigger image, bigger picture of you, and also for the other side, maybe the person who was interested in joining the company, they want to get to know the company first before committing, right? So it's
Yeah,
de-risking both parties. And that's something I think is very important, because one thing I don't want to see is that new companies are just founders who are employed, and then a bunch of like random people putting in some work and have no connection to the startup, no connection to the work output, quote unquote, like the Fiverr effect of companies, that you should not
sure.
just have some random strangers work with you on a one-time basis. I fully agree. We should have teams. We should have full commitment and just share the ambition. But we should have a hybrid of where we can get these people very early, very easy, sort of like the Fiverr, but then convert them into employed people. And that's something that's really lacking, in my opinion, in this space. So that's what I'm trying to build with a couple of friends. We're also
Very
remote,
cool.
and that's just amazing.
Yeah, and I think this is the whole sort of difference between businesses that happened 10 years ago, where people had to be in the same city, typically in San Francisco. They ended up being very homogenous because they were the people who could take risks. And yeah, I think now what we're seeing beginning to emerge is companies sprouting out of nowhere almost, where founders have never met in person. And yeah, we're seeing those companies be incredibly perform incredibly, and it's just a whole other paradigm that I think is really hard for people in certain places to understand why this is happening. And I think the other part is that as people stop wanting to live in specific places, whether that's SF, New York, London, whatever big city you want to name, I think people that live in those cities actually find that really hard to understand, that people wouldn't want to be there. So I think there's a whole expectations that's changing, where people realize they've got more power than I think they necessarily thought they had to impose these things on the companies that they're working for.
Yeah, and it might become the biggest perk for any job application. I'd be very surprised if it wouldn't be. If I would always take the option to be remote and also be in the office, like we can also have a hybrid model, but I'd always take that for a perk. Like, screw everything else.
Yeah,
Just having lived in this environment and knowing what's the underlying life of being able to work remotely, is just out competing any price offer, any perks, any, I don't know, water cooler or the nicest ping pong table in the office. Like, screw that. Who needs that?
yeah. Give me my time back is the real
Exactly.
benefit that I want.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a very cool way of ending. I really hope that the future job applications will be much leaner, much simpler, much faster to get people hired, and sort of like a paid remote internship, quote unquote, that you could just thrown in very early, and you sort of get to know everyone. And then also just a heavy focus on explaining why this is good, and because people who've never worked remotely, I say there's a big fear, and it's valid. Like, you will be working alone, you will be working in your own living room.
Yeah.
So it's important to also be very upfront and say, yeah, there's definitely challenges, and you need to find hobbies, you need to make more friends locally, because there will be no friends in your, well, no colleagues who you can hang out with. It's just not happening. So that's my mission, like to empower more people to go remotely, but also just to show that there is definitely some things you need to consider when doing that.
And completely agree. Yeah, I think it's about being mindful of the differences required between those things, and yeah, really understanding the strengths and weaknesses of your own personality to participate in a world where those changes are necessary to participate in a more remote future.
Yeah, no, I agree. Cool, Chris. This was a lot of fun. If you want to say more about your company, now's the time. I'm adding some links to the show notes. So anything you want to tag, your Twitter, for example, and other places that people can reach you.
Yeah, Twitter is probably the best place. I think at Chris_Hurd, FirstbaseHQ.com if you want to follow up on any of the things that we discussed up front about what we're doing. But yeah, generally, I think we touched on most of it up front.
Cool, Chris. Thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, likewise. Really enjoyed it.
And have a wonderful weekend.
I will try. You too.
Okay, bye.
Speak soon.